Hey guys, it's Masood. Welcome back to Med School Moose. This is going to be Emergency Medicine Board Exam High Yield Facts Part 6. This is information that you need to know for the annual in-training exam during residency, as well as for the ABEM qualifying exam after residency for board certification. Really important stuff here. That being said, let's jump right into it. First question here, at what PaO2 are steroids recommended for PJP pneumonia? So if you have a patient with HIV or AIDS, they're having respiratory symptoms, you get the chest x-ray and you make the diagnosis of PCP or PJP pneumonia. One of the little factoids that you need to know is what number to start steroids at, and that is when the PaO2 is less than 70 millimeters of mercury. So if you have this patient, you get the ABG and you see the PaO2 is less than 70, you're going to start steroids. That's an important part of the management. Which heart murmur is commonly associated with hemoptysis? It's a bit of a weird association, but if you think it through, it's mitral stenosis. I'm not going to go into the whole pathophysiology of why this is happening, but just one of those things that you need to know. Heart murmur that's associated with hemoptysis, we're thinking about mitral stenosis. Blue dot sign is typically seen in what condition? This is going to be torsion of the testicular appendage. This is not true testicular torsion, it's just a torsion of the appendage like it says. And the blue dot sign is this bluish or purplish discoloration that may be seen on physical exam. So if you see that, you want to be considering torsion of the testicular appendage. Obviously, you can't just use that to rule out testicular torsion, but that blue dot sign, that's the classic association. When should you use oral steroids to treat contact dermatitis? It's when there's a greater than 10% body surface area involved. Typically, a milder case, you can just use topical steroids, antihistamines, that kind of thing. But if it's a bit more severe, it's a bit more extensive, greater than 10% body surface area, that's when you want to consider transitioning to oral steroids, typically an oral prednisone, for about 2 to 3 weeks. Thick and thin blood smears are used to detect blank. You're going to have to go back to your USMLE Step 1 studying to try to remember this one. Thick and thin blood smears are used to detect malaria. What toxin is commonly associated with hot-cold reversal? This is one of those things, they love to test these weird toxins and their symptoms on boards. Ciguatera is the one that is associated with hot-cold reversal. So if you're in the heat, you're feeling really cold. If you're in a colder temperature or environment, you're feeling really hot. You see that, you want to think Ciguatera toxin. Wound botulism is associated with what drug? Another one of those really random associations, but it's going to be black tar heroin. If you see wound botulism, just know that is associated with black tar heroin. Overdose of which beta blocker can cause QRS widening and seizures? This one is pretty important to know, and that is propranolol. This particular beta blocker, propranolol, does have some sodium channel blocking effects, so that is why it causes QRS widening. The good thing about that is it can also be treated with sodium bicarbonate. So something like your TCA overdose causes QRS widening, and you treat that with sodium bicarb. Propranolol can cause QRS widening, and you would treat that with sodium bicarb as well. At what sodium level do seizures and coma typically occur? This one is important for the boards, also important for real life. Typically, it's a sodium level of less than 120 milliequivalents per liter. Obviously, this is not a hard and fast rule. I myself have seen patients with sodium levels lower than that who are not exhibiting seizure activity, but that is typically the threshold less than 120 that we want to be concerned about potential seizure activity. What is the treatment of choice for emergency contraception? Some of the boards questions, they really like these hyper-specific questions about what medication, what dose, what route, what frequency. So the one that I have seen out there, the treatment of choice for emergency contraception is levonorgestrel, I think I'm saying that right, 1.5 grams by mouth once. That is the treatment of choice for emergency contraception. Moving on, a child chewing on an electrical cord is likely to cause injury to which vascular structure? Hopefully this is just something you're seeing on the boards and not in real life, but if a child is chewing on an electrical cord, the main vascular structure that we're concerned about is the sphenopalatine artery. That is the one that can be damaged and that can cause the bleeding. What is the most common complication of a slipped capital femoral epiphysis? This is going to be avascular necrosis, specifically of the femoral head. Remember, this slipped capital femoral epiphysis, the SCFE, is typically occurring in our 12 to 15-year-old males, maybe a little bit obese, having difficulty walking. You get the x-ray and you can diagnose it that way, and they are at risk for avascular necrosis of the femoral head. At what serum salicylate levels is hemodialysis indicated? This is another one of those things, not a hard and fast rule, obviously, but you want to be thinking about it greater than 100 milligrams per deciliter. If we see that when we get our salicylate blood level, we want to be thinking potentially this patient could be a candidate for hemodialysis to clear that, because that is a bit more on the severe end of the spectrum for salicylate toxicity. What is the treatment for seizures due to osmotic osmotic demyelination syndrome. This is, again, another one of those kind of specific dosages that they want you to know. It seems a little bit silly. I have seen questions on this. That's why I'm including them. And the treatment of choice for seizures due to osmotic demyelination syndrome is going to be D5 water, D5W, at 3 milliliters per kilo per hour. So osmotic demyelination syndrome leading to seizures, we want to treat that D5W, 3 mils per kilo per hour. What is the treatment for hydrofluoric acid burns? This one, I have seen this pop up on the boards all over the place. It's going to be calcium gluconate. Obviously, with any type of exposure, especially to the skin, we want to do local irrigation first. Then after that, you're going to move on. You can use topical calcium gluconate. You can use subcutaneous. If the patient is still having severe pain, severe symptoms, then you can even move to intra-arterial calcium gluconate. Really important to know that. If you looked at the cover slide for this video, that was a picture of a hydrofluoric acid burn, if you caught on to that one. But just know that the treatment for that is calcium gluconate. And now moving on from that, what profession is typically associated with hydrofluoric acid burns? They might not tell you that someone was exposed to hydrofluoric acid. They might tell you the patient's profession, and they want you to be able to make that association, and it's going to be glass etchers. So if you have a vignette, there's a glass etcher, they maybe weren't wearing gloves, or they think there was a hole in the glove, and now they're having severe pain on their hand. You want to be thinking about a hydrofluoric acid burn. You're going to treat that with calcium gluconate. Really important to know that. Which type of shock has decreased systemic vascular resistance? This is going to be distributive shock, so septic shock, for example. This is an important distinguishing feature because other types of shock, like cardiogenic shock, for example, there is an increased systemic vascular resistance, but with distributive shock, there is a decreased systemic vascular resistance. What laboratory abnormality is frequently associated with dengue fever? This is actually something that I was randomly talking with a PA about at work the other day, and it's going to be thrombocytopenia. Remember, this dengue fever is typically endemic to Eastern Africa, South America, Asia, so you want to be considering this if a patient had traveled there recently and it's a mosquito-borne illness, and one of the common laboratory abnormalities that is frequently associated with it is thrombocytopenia. Moving on to the next one, strawberry cervix is classically associated with what condition? This is going to be trichomoniasis. I want you to know that association, strawberry cervix, is trichomoniasis. They may not say that. They may give you a picture. I'm not going to do that because I think YouTube would get pretty mad at me if I included that, but it literally looks like a strawberry. If you see that picture in a female patient that's sexually active, that's having those GU symptoms, you want to be thinking about trichomoniasis. Hot springs are commonly associated with infection from what microbe? This is going to be Naegleria fowleri. Another one of those microbiology things from back in the day in med school. If there's a patient that's been in hot springs recently and they have some type of rash, they have some type of infection, we want to be thinking about Naegleria as a causative agent of that. What is the most common nerve injury associated with a supracondylar humerus fracture? That's going to be an injury to the anterior osseous nerve. Remember, this is a branch of the median nerve going all the way back to anatomy, and the important thing to know here is that patients may have difficulty making an OK sign. So as you see here, here's your visual stimulus. This is what hopefully you normally should be able to do. If a patient has a supracondylar fracture of the humerus, potential for anterior interosseous nerve damage, they will not be able to do that. They will have weakness due to paralysis of the flexor digitorum profundus and the flexor pollicis longus. So really know all those key features of that vignette. You want to be thinking about that. What is the most likely space for an abdominal aortic aneurysm to rupture? Read this one carefully. It's the most likely space for it to rupture. That is going to be retroperitoneal. The one thing to note here is that an intraperitoneal rupture is more fatal, but the most likely space is actually retroperitoneal. So know that difference there. A retropharyngeal or prevertebral space greater than blank is suggestive of retropharyngeal abscess. This is another one of those obscure numbers, but it is important to know. I have seen it come up on exams, and it's going to be greater than 7 millimeters. A retropharyngeal space greater than 7 millimeters is suggestive of retropharyngeal abscess. And another visual stimulus here, this is the retropharyngeal space right in front of the vertebral body here, right where that arrow is pointing. Typically, this is just a potential space. It's usually less than 5 millimeters, but if it gets larger than 7 millimeters, definitely larger than 1 centimeter, we want to be really concerned about a retropharyngeal abscess. EMTALA requires hospitals to provide a medical screening exam for patients with a maximum distance of blank. This is going to be one that we need to know. It's a maximum distance of 250 yards. Important to know for real life if patients are out there, in your parking lot or something like that, they need a medical screening exam as well, but also important to know for the boards. EMTALA, it's 250 yards within the hospital. Those patients need a medical screening exam. Ingestion of what substance typically causes serum ketosis without acidosis? This one's really important to know, can be really helpful for if you're working up a toxicology patient. It's going to be isopropyl alcohol. If a patient ingests isopropyl alcohol, hand sanitizer, something like that, they're trying to get, the drunk sensation off of something like that. You get your labs. They may have ketosis, but they will not have acidosis. Really important distinguishing feature compared to other ingestions like ethanol. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you got value out of this video, make sure to leave me a like, drop me a comment, share this video with other people that you think might find it useful if they're studying for their boards as well, and be sure to subscribe to enjoy all of my content. Thank you so much. Good luck with your studying, and I will see you in the next one.